The morning began quietly on Mark's ranch, the way most mornings usually did. The sun had just started to rise over the hills, spreading soft gold across the dry land. The cattle were still half asleep. The wind had not yet picked up, and the only sound was the steady creak of the windmill turning in slow circles. Mark liked mornings like this. They gave him time to breathe, time to think, and time to remember why he chose a life far from towns and noise. He moved around the yard with an easy stride, checking the water troughs and carrying feed. He had lived alone for many years, so every job was a job he did himself. He didn't complain. Hard work kept the mind steady. As he reached the barn, something felt slightly different. It wasn't a noise or a clear sign, but more like a feeling in the air. He paused near the door and looked down at the ground. There, right in the dust, were footprints light, careful footprints he had not seen the day before. He crouched down and touched the marks. They were small, not a man's boots, not a child's prints either. They looked like the steps of someone moving quietly, almost as if trying not to be seen. His eyes narrowed. In this part of the country, strangers rarely came without reason. Sometimes riders passed, sometimes hunters wandered near, but these prints didn't match those kinds of people. These prints showed fear. They showed someone trying hard not to be noticed. He slowly reached for the barn door and pushed it open. The inside was dim, filled with the smell of hay, leather, and horses. His mare lifted her head, ears flicking toward him, but she didn't seem alarmed. That meant whoever was inside hadn't caused trouble. Mark closed the door behind him and waited quietly. Years of ranch work had taught him the value of patience and silence. If someone was hiding, coming at them too fast could lead to misunderstandings. After a few slow steps, he spotted something in the corner behind a tall stack of hay. It looked like a bit of cloth, but it shifted ever so slightly. He stepped closer. That was when he saw Hertha, young Apache woman, curled up against the wall with her knees pulled close to her chest. Her eyes were wide, her breath shaky, and she held a small bundle of belongings wrapped tightly in a cloth. She looked exhausted, like she had not slept in days. Mark stopped a few feet away. He didn't want to scare her or make her think he meant harm. Life in these lands had made people wary of one another, and he understood that well. He kept his voice calm when he spoke. "I see you're hiding," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." The young woman didn't answer at first. Her lips were dry and her hands trembled slightly. She looked like she was deciding whether to speak or stay silent. Mark didn't move closer. He knew trust wasn't something that appeared in a moment. It was something that had to be earned. After a few seconds, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I just needed a place to rest." Her voice was weak. It carried the weight of fear and exhaustion. Mark noticed her clothes were dusty, her hair tangled, and her feet looked sore. She had clearly walked far. "What's your name?" Mark asked softly. "Tiva," she said. "How long have you been here?" "Since before sunrise," she replied. "I didn't want trouble. I only wanted to sleep for a little while." Mark nodded slowly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her weak posture told him she wasn't well. She looked hungry, thirsty, and worn down from what seemed like days of running. "What happened?" he asked in a gentle tone. She looked down at her hands for a long moment. When she finally lifted her gaze, tears glimmered in her eyes, though she held them back with quiet strength. "My camp was attacked," she said. "Riders came at night. They set fires. People ran in different directions. I don't know what happened to my brother. I ran toward the hills. I kept running until I couldn't anymore." Mark listened closely. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He knew the world could be unfair, cruel even. Sometimes wrong people made harmful choices. Hearing her story made him realize she wasn't some threat or troublemaker. She was someone who had lost almost everything in a single night. "Have you eaten?" he asked. She shook her head again. Mark stood up and walked toward the shelves. He pulled out a canteen of water and a small cloth bag with bread inside. When he returned, Tiva looked unsure, as if she didn't know whether to accept it. But Mark placed it gently on the ground near her. "It's for you," he said. She reached for the water first, drinking slowly, careful not to spill a drop. Then she took small bites of the bread, as if afraid it might disappear if she ate too quickly. Every movement she made reminded Mark how long she must have been struggling. When she finished, Mark sat on a bale of hay nearby, not too close, but near enough to show he didn't intend harm. "You can rest here for a little while," he said, "but this ranch isn't a safe hiding place." Her eyes widened again. "Are you telling me to leave?" "No," he replied, "but others might come through this land. If they find you, they'll ask questions neither of us wants to answer." Fear flickered over her face. She clutched her small bundle tighter. Mark felt something shift inside him, a quiet pull of responsibility. He hadn't planned to get involved in someone else's pain that morning, but he also wasn't the kind of man who could look away from someone in need. He took a slow breath. "Where were you planning to go?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I just wanted somewhere safe, even for one night." Mark understood that feeling more than she realized. He remembered the first months he lived on the ranch alone. The nights were cold, the days long, and the silence heavy enough to break a person. But he had survived through stubbornness and grit. Looking at Tiva now, he realized she didn't have that same strength left in her, not after everything she had gone through. He stood up suddenly, but not in a threatening way. She watched him closely, unsure of what he might do. He walked to the barn door and looked outside for a moment. The land stretched in all directions, open and endless. It held freedom, but also danger. He thought about the riders she mentioned. If they were still searching, the ranch was one of the easier places to check. He turned back to her. "You can't stay here," he said. Her face tightened with fear. "Not because I don't want you here," he added, "but because it's not safe." She swallowed hard. Unsure what he meant, Mark took a slow breath and said the words that surprised even him the moment they left his mouth. "Pack your things," he said quietly, but firmly. "You're coming with me." Tiva stared at him, shocked. She didn't understand at first. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I can't leave you to face trouble alone," he said simply. "And because you deserve a place where you can rest without fear. I know a cabin in the hills. Nobody goes there. You'll be safe." She looked at him for a long time, like she was trying to decide whether her life could really depend on trusting a stranger. But something about his calm voice, his honest eyes, and the food he had given her made her believe he meant what he said. Slowly, she nodded. Mark stepped out of the barn to prepare his horse and saddle. As he worked, he kept thinking about how quickly this morning had changed. He had started the day alone, expecting nothing new. And now, he had taken responsibility for a woman who had lost her home, her people, and maybe her brother, inside the barn. Tiva gathered her small bundle. She touched it gently, as if it held the last pieces of her old life. Then she stood and walked toward the door, her steps unsteady but determined. When she stepped outside, the sunlight fell on her face. For the first time since he found her, Mark saw a faint spark of hope in her eyes. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy. It might even be dangerous. But he also knew one thing without doubt. Leaving her alone was never an option. And so, their story began, not with trust that came instantly, but with a quiet decision that one human life was worth protecting, no matter how the world outside tried to divide them. Mark tightened the saddle straps on his horse, checking every buckle twice. He didn't want any mistakes, not today. He kept glancing toward the barn, wondering if Tiva might change her mind or get scared. But she came out quietly, holding her small bundle close to her chest. She looked tired but calmer than before. Maybe it was the food, or maybe knowing she wasn't being forced to run alone anymore. He helped her step onto the horse first, letting her sit behind him. She hesitated again, unsure if she should touch him, but Mark gave a small nod. "Hold on so you don't fall," he said in a steady voice. She placed her hands gently on his coat, keeping space as much as possible. He understood. Trust didn't appear suddenly. It grew slowly, like morning light rising over the hills. They started moving, the horse walking in long, steady steps across the dry land. The sun had risen fully now, warming the air. Birds flew overhead, calling to each other as they crossed the open sky. Mark guided the horse toward the hills, taking a small path only he knew. It wound through uneven ground, scattered rocks, and patches of tall grass. Few people traveled this way, and that was exactly why he chose it. Tiva stayed silent for a long time, her grip light but steady. Mark didn't speak either. He believed in giving people space to gather their thoughts. After almost half an hour, she finally spoke in a soft voice. "Why are you doing this?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He looked ahead, watching the trail before responding. "Because it's the right thing to do." "People don't usually help my people," she said quietly. "I'm not most people," he replied. She didn't know what to say to that. She lowered her eyes deep in thought. Mark sensed she wasn't challenging him. She was simply surprised. Kindness wasn't something she had seen much of in the last few days. After a few more minutes, she asked, "Do you live alone?" "Yes," Mark said. "Been that way a long time." "Why?" she asked, her voice curious, not judgmental. Mark breathed in slowly. "Lost my family young. After that, I just kept to myself. Built the ranch. Worked hard. Didn't have time for much else." Tiva nodded slightly. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be," Mark replied. "Life gives everyone something to carry. Looks like you've been carrying a heavy load too." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know if my brother survived. I don't know where my people went. I don't even know if they think I'm alive." "We'll find out," Mark said gently. "But first, you need a safe place to rest." The horse continued up the hill. The path grew steeper, and Tiva held on tighter to keep her balance. Mark felt her grip change, not scared, just alert. She was watching the land around them carefully, the way someone who grew up outdoors naturally did. She wasn't a helpless person. She was simply someone who had been pushed into a storm too big for her to fight alone. After some time, clouds gathered overhead. The wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of distant rain. Mark looked up at the sky. "Storm's coming earlier than I expected," he muttered. Tiva looked worried. "Will it be bad?" "Not too bad," Mark said. "But we need to keep moving." The horse kept a steady pace as they climbed. The air grew cooler. Tiva's fingers gripped the back of Mark's coat a little tighter as the wind pushed against them. After a few minutes, rain started to fall light at first, then heavier. Mark pulled his coat collar higher and turned the horse slightly toward a group of tall pine trees. The branches gave them some shelter. He stopped the horse and looked back at Tiva. Rain had soaked her hair and clothes, but she didn't complain. She looked determined to keep going. "You doing all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I've walked through storms before." "But not after 2 days of running," he reminded her. She looked away. Unable to argue because she knew he was right, Mark reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wool blanket. "Take this," she said. She hesitated again, but he gave it to her gently. She wrapped it around her shoulders, holding it tightly. The warmth brought a small sigh of relief from her lips. Mark waited a moment, letting her breathe, then said, "We can't stay here long. The cabin isn't far." They continued their journey after the rain eased slightly. The ground became muddy, slowing the horse, but Mark didn't push too hard. He didn't want to cause injury to the horse or to Tiva. Eventually, the sky brightened again. The storm moved away, leaving a fresh smell in the air. The hills around them looked washed clean, and the breeze carried the soft sound of running water from a stream nearby. Tiva spoke again, her voice steadier now. "How far is the place we're going?" "Another hour," Mark said. "It's hidden behind a ridge. I built it years ago when I needed extra space to store tools. Haven't gone there much lately." "Why did you choose to take me there?" she asked. Mark thought about it. "Because no one else goes there. And because you need somewhere safe. That's reason enough." She stared at his back, trying to read the truth in his tone. Everything about him seemed straightforward, calm, and honest. She still didn't understand why he cared. But she no longer felt the same fear she felt earlier. As they moved deeper into the hills, the land grew more peaceful. Trees stood tall on both sides of the path, and sunlight filtered through their leaves in soft patterns. A few deer scattered when they passed. The air smelled of pine and earth. Tiva finally asked something she had been holding back. What if someone sees us? Someone who doesn't like Apaches? Mark didn't hesitate. Then they'll talk to me first. I'll handle it. But what if they hurt you because of me? She whispered. Mark shook his head slowly. I've handled trouble before. I'm not afraid of standing up for what's right. Her eyes softened. She wasn't used to such certainty from others, especially from someone outside her people. After another long stretch of riding, they reached the ridge. Mark guided the horse around a cluster of boulders, then down a narrow slope. At the bottom stood a small wooden cabin surrounded by tall trees. Even from a distance, it looked safe, quiet, hidden, untouched by trouble. Tiva leaned forward slightly, surprised. It's beautiful here, she said softly. No one comes, Mark said, which is why you'll be safe. He stopped the horse and helped Tiva get down carefully. When she stepped on the ground, her legs shook a little from the long ride. Mark offered an arm for support, not forceful, just steady. She accepted it. The cabin door creaked slightly when he opened it. Dust hung in the air, but everything was still solid and usable. The fireplace was unlit, the shelves empty except for a few old tools, and the wooden table bore a thin layer of dust. But the roof was strong. The walls were sturdy. It was shelter, something Tiva needed desperately. Mark set down the saddlebag. I'll get firewood, he said. You stay inside and rest. Before he stepped out, Tiva looked at him with a softness he hadn't seen before. Thank you, she whispered. He paused for a moment, not expecting her gratitude to feel so heavy and real. He gave a small nod. You're welcome. As he walked outside to gather wood. He realized he was no longer thinking about whether he should help her. He was thinking about how to help her, how to keep her safe, how to find her people when the time was right, and how to carry the responsibility he had chosen. Inside the cabin, Tiva placed her bundle on the table. For the first time in many days, she felt like she wasn't running. She felt the floor under her feet, the quiet around her, and the sense that someone finally cared whether she lived or disappeared. And outside, Mark worked quickly, knowing that helping her wasn't a burden. It was a promise he intended to keep. The cabin filled slowly with warmth as the fire grew. Tiva sat near the flames, her hands stretched out, feeling heat return to her fingers. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, but the blanket Mark gave her helped keep the cold away. She watched the flames rise and fall, the orange glow lighting the small room. For the first time since the night her camp was attacked, she felt her breathing slow down instead of speeding up from fear. Mark came back inside carrying more wood. His boots were muddy, and his coat was wet, but his face was calm, as if carrying heavy loads was just part of who he was. You should rest, he said. You've been running too long. Tiva nodded slightly. I will, but not yet. I need to understand what will happen next. We stay here for a few days, Mark said. You regain your strength. After that, we decide the next step. Tiva lowered her eyes. I don't want to trouble you. You're not trouble, Mark replied quietly. You needed help. That's all. Tiva didn't answer. She wasn't used to simple kindness. Where she came from, people survived by relying on family, not strangers. Trust was something built over years, not days. Yet here she was, sitting in a stranger's cabin, feeling safer than she had in a long time. Mark wiped the table with an old cloth and began organizing things. He didn't hover over her, didn't question her every move. He simply worked, giving her space, while still making sure she was all right. After a while, he said, there's clean water at the stream close by. We'll go together once the rain stops. You can wash up, maybe clean your clothes. She looked grateful. Thank you, gave a small nod. Hours passed. Tiva ate a little more food, warmed herself, and finally lay down on the small bed in the corner. Mark sat near the fire on a wooden stool, carving a small piece of wood with his pocket knife. It was something he did when he needed to think. The sound of the knife scraping against the wood was soft and steady. Tiva watched him quietly for a moment. Are you always this calm? She asked. Mark looked up, a small hint of a smile appearing. Most days. Working with animals teaches patience. And working with people, she asked. That's harder, he admitted. People carry pain you can't always see. Tiva nodded. She understood that too well. The rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle. The wind whispered through the trees, making the cabin feel even more hidden from the world. Tiva's eyelids grew heavy, and soon she drifted into a deep sleep, one that wasn't filled with fear or running. While she slept, Mark continued carving. He couldn't help but glance at her from time to time. She looked younger when she wasn't terrified. He wondered about her life, her family, and the courage it must have taken to survive alone for as long as she did. When Tiva finally woke, the fire had burned into glowing embers. Mark had stepped outside to bring more wood, and she sat up slowly, stretching her sore muscles. She walked to the door and opened it just a little. Mark was there, stacking wood and checking the area around the cabin. His movements were careful, not rushed. He scanned the trees as if making sure no one had followed them. When he noticed her standing at the door, he gave a small nod. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Good. Come with me to the stream. It's close." They walked together through the trees. The ground was wet, and the leaves glistened with leftover rain. Birds sang softly, shaking water from their wings. The stream ran clear and cool. Tiva knelt beside it, dipping her hands into the water. The cold shocked her slightly, but it felt refreshing. Mark stood a few steps back, giving her space. She washed her face, arms, and hair as best she could. When she was done, she sat on a rock and looked at the flowing water. "I used to come to a stream like this with my brother," she said softly. "We would catch small fish with our hands. He was better at it than me." Mark listened quietly, letting her speak at her own pace. "He always looked out for me," she continued. "When the attack happened, I don't know where he went. I ran because I heard someone shout for me to go." Mark felt a heaviness in his chest. If he told you to run, he was trying to keep you alive. She nodded, though her eyes glistened with sadness. "I wish I knew if he made it. We'll try to find out," Mark said firmly. "Once it's safe?" Tiva looked at him, surprised by how serious he sounded. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. Mark didn't hesitate. "Because someone should." Tiva didn't know how to respond. She simply stood and followed him back to the cabin. Days passed, and life settled into a gentle rhythm. Mark repaired parts of the cabin roof, gathered food, and kept watch on the hills. Tiva helped by cleaning the inside, sweeping the floor, and preparing simple meals. They didn't talk constantly, but their silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like two people who understood each other without needing many words. One afternoon, Mark showed her how to fix a broken fence post near the cabin. He handed her a small hammer while he held the wood steady. She swung it carefully, her movements unsure at first. "You don't have to be perfect," Mark said. "Just steady." She tried again, this time with more confidence. When the nail went in straight, she smiled. Small, quiet smile, but one filled with pride. Mark noticed, and for a moment, something warm sparked inside him. It wasn't romantic or rushed, it was a gentle appreciation for seeing her regain a bit of her strength. Later that evening, Tiva taught him something in return. She showed him a plant she found nearby that could help with small cuts and stings. She explained its use patiently, crushing a leaf to show its texture. Mark watched closely, genuinely interested. "Never knew that," he said. "My mother taught me," Tiva replied. "She said nature gives us what we need if we learn to listen." Mark nodded slowly. "Your mother sounds wise," Tiva whispered. "I miss her every day." The fire crackled gently. Outside, the sky turned orange and pink as the sun set behind the hills. The quiet felt safe, peaceful, and almost unreal, considering everything she had gone through. But peace didn't last. One morning, Mark stepped outside to check the edges of the clearing and froze. On the muddy ground, near the trees, were fresh hoof prints, several horses. And they weren't from yesterday. Tiva saw his expression when he came back inside. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tightening with worry. "Riders pass close," Mark said. More than one? Her face paled. Were they looking for me? I don't know, he said honestly. But they're too close. Fear returned to her eyes, the same fear she had when he first found her in the barn. Maybe I should leave, she whispered. I don't want danger to come to you. Mark shook his head firmly. You're not leaving alone. I made a promise to keep you safe. But no, he said gently but clearly. If they're searching, staying here isn't enough anymore. We need a new plan. She took a shaky breath. What kind of plan? Mark looked at her, his decision clear. We go to your people. Deep into your land. They'll protect you better than any cabin can. Tiva stared at him, shocked. That's dangerous. They might not trust you. They don't have to trust me, Mark said. They only need to see that I brought you home. Tiva felt her throat tighten. The thought of returning to her people brought both hope and fear. She didn't know what they would think, didn't know what she would find. But Mark's steady voice grounded her. You'd really go that far for me? She asked quietly. Mark met her eyes with calm certainty. I said I wouldn't abandon you. I meant it. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind outside rustled the trees gently, as if waiting for her answer. Finally, she nodded. I'll go with you. Mark gave a small nod in return. Then we leave at dawn. And in that moment, something unspoken settled between them. Bond built not on fear or need, but on trust, courage, and the simple belief that helping another person was worth every risk. The dawn came slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The cabin stood quiet in the early light, its wooden walls glowing faintly under the rising sun. Mark had been awake long before the world brightened. He checked the saddles, packed food, filled water canteens, and made sure everything they needed was secure. He moved with quiet purpose, his mind already on the journey ahead. Tiva stepped outside, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her dark hair flowed over her shoulders, catching the soft morning breeze. She looked nervous, but her eyes carried a quiet strength. Mark noticed she had tied her bundle tighter than usual. She held it like someone holding the last pieces of her life. You ready? Mark asked. She nodded. Yes, the word was small but firm. Mark helped her mount the horse, then climbed up in front. Tiva held on lightly, more steady than before. As the horse began moving, Mark cast one last look at the cabin. It had served its purpose, a place of safety, healing, and quiet understanding. Now, it was time to leave it behind. The path stretched ahead, leading them deeper into Apache land. The air grew warmer as the sun rose higher, and birds fluttered through the trees. At first, the journey was peaceful. Tiva pointed out familiar plants and marks in the ground that told stories only she understood. A deer had passed recently. A fox had circled near a tree. A bird had nested on a branch. Mark listened carefully, respecting her knowledge of the land. In return, he showed her how he chose safe paths, avoiding open spaces where riders might see them. Slowly, their strengths blended, making them a careful, alert team. Around midday, they stopped near a cliff that overlooked a long stretch of valley. Tiva recognized the shape of a distant ridge and gasped softly. I've seen that place, she whispered. It's close to where my people usually travel. Mark followed her gaze. Then we're going the right way. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and bread. Tiva drank water quietly, thinking deeply. Mark didn't disturb her thoughts. He knew she was imagining what she might find, and what she might not. After they rested, they continued riding. The land changed gradually. Trees became thicker. Tall grass whispered against the horse's legs. And the wind carried the faint scent of smoke camp smoke, not wildfires. Tiva straightened suddenly. My people might be near. Mark slowed the horse. You sure? She closed her eyes and breathed in. Yes. I can smell their fires. Mark felt his heart tighten. The moment they had been moving toward was finally here. He didn't know how her people would react to him, but he wasn't turning back. They moved forward cautiously. Tiva guided the horse now, pointing Mark toward hidden trails only someone raised on this land could know. After a long and quiet ride, they reached a clearing. Smoke rose gently from several huts. Figures moved around, women cooking, children playing, elders sitting near small fires. It was a peaceful scene, alive with normal daily life, but it didn't stay peaceful for long. The moment one person noticed the horse approaching, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Warriors appeared from behind trees and rocks, bows drawn, spears raised. In seconds, they surrounded Mark and Tiva. Mark stopped the horse and lifted his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. Tiva placed a hand on his arm. A tall warrior stepped forward, his eyes sharp, his posture tense. "Why is a cowboy bringing one of our women here?" he demanded. Tiva swallowed hard. Then she slid off the horse and stood tall, despite her shaking legs. "Because he saved me," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "He found me when I was alone. He gave me food. He protected me. He brought me back." The warrior stared at her, disbelief and recognition flickering across his face. "Tiva," he whispered. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. The warrior rushed forward and gripped her shoulders. "We thought you were gone. Your brother searched for you for days, my brother," she said in a trembling voice. "He's alive?" "Yes," the warrior replied. "He never gave up." Tiva covered her mouth, overwhelmed with relief, as the warriors lowered their weapons. Mark remained still on the horse, not wanting to offend anyone. He watched the reunion quietly, hoping he had done enough to get her home safely. Moments later, a man ran through the clearing. His face carried the same features as Tiva's sharp eyes, strong jaw, determined expression. He stopped when he saw her. "Tiva," he whispered, almost breathless. She ran to him and he caught her in a tight embrace. They held each other for a long moment, crying quietly, their shoulders shaking under the weight of everything they had survived. Mark looked away, giving them privacy. A small, satisfied ache formed inside him. He had brought her home. That was all he needed. After a while, Tiva's brother approached him cautiously. "You brought my sister back," he said. "She deserved to return safely," Mark said simply. Her brother studied him. "Why? You are not one of us." Mark shrugged lightly. "Didn't matter to me. She needed help." The warrior's eyes softened. "Most men would not risk so much. Most men don't think enough," Mark replied. A few of the warriors exchanged glances. They seemed surprised by his honesty. Tiva walked to Mark, her eyes gentle and grateful. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Mark replied. "Just stay safe." She lowered her gaze, then looked up again with quiet emotion. "Will you ever visit again?" Mark hesitated. "If it won't cause trouble, it won't," her brother said. "You brought her back. That means something here." Mark nodded, touched by the acceptance in the man's voice. For a moment, the world felt still, just a cowboy standing before a girl he had protected, surrounded by the people who mattered most to her. Tiva stepped closer. "You could have left me in that barn," she said. "But you didn't. You carried danger with me. You gave me hope. I will never forget what you did." Mark felt something warm stir inside him. "I won't forget you either." Silence settled between them, not awkward, but full of meaning to lives crossing paths in a way neither expected. Finally, Mark swung back onto his horse. "I should go," he said softly. "My ranch needs me." Tiva nodded slowly. "May the spirits guide your path." "And yours," Mark replied. He turned the horse toward the hills. The path home stretched far and empty, but he didn't feel lonely. Not today. As he rode away, Tiva watched until he disappeared behind the trees. She pressed a hand to her heart, feeling both sadness and gratitude. She was home, safe, alive, and because of him. She could stand among her people again. Mark kept riding, the wind brushing against him, the sun warming his back. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he carried the memory of their journey with him strong, clear and unforgettable. The world around him felt wider now, filled with decisions that mattered and connections that surprised him. He had done what he believed was right, even when danger followed close behind, and somewhere in the quiet land he crossed, he knew a young woman was standing with her people again. Remembering the cowboy who told her gently, "Pack your things, you're coming with me," and meant every word in the best possible way.